G'day everyone, Wesley here from the Mental Awareness Foundation, and today we are doing our Under the Radar series. You may be asking, what is Under the Radar? Well, Under the Radar is where we at the Mental Awareness Foundation take the time to interview amazing people that may not have, or maybe their story isn't being heard so much, or they're flying under the radar, and we feel it's our mission to bring that story to you because they're doing great work. So our guest today, ladies and gentlemen, is Peter Bell. This year, Peter released a book called Stepping Out the Other Side. The book was written by Peter, and it was about his first-hand experience with having a mental breakdown at the age of 38. Peter was admitted to hospital where he was fortunate enough to find the help that he needed. A diagnosis of obsessive-compulsive disorder brought some relief, and with that help of the support network of family and health professionals, Peter took the first steps in the fight for his life. Today we are going to discuss that fight and what Peter has learned along the way in how to manage his illness and also live a more meaningful life. One thing that I really want to point out is that Peter now sees his breakdown as a breakthrough, which I personally believe is an amazingly positive way to see things, and that message alone offers help to people that are out there that may be struggling. I'm fortunate enough to actually have met Peter over the last 18 months, so when this book was released and when I had the chance to read this book, I was blown away about learning about his situation, and I just had no idea. So I want to read a passage from Pete's book. Here it goes. My fight is not over, it is continual. My story is important if it can help others. I do not feel that it is special or unique. It is surprisingly common in society. Everyday people are not sharing enough of these stories, and they need to become normalised. I have to say, I 100% agree. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Peter Bell.
Thank you, Wes. Great to be here, mate.
No, and thank you for coming on board. I thought, mate, just obviously to show our audience or introduce to our audience, mate, where are you from? What was life like for you as a teenager, and go from there.
Yeah, mate. Born and bred Brisbane. I would imagine a fairly atypical sort of upbringing. School,
yep.
Great childhood, plenty of sport. Plenty of studying, maybe not as much at times.
Yes.
And then university, probably at times there a little bit too much partying and things like that. But yeah, mate, as far as my teenage years and childhood goes, it was very enjoyable. Couldn't have asked for more. Great parents, great support network, great friends. And I think it's a really important point to make with regards to, when you talk about mental illness and mental health, that really doesn't discriminate. There's absolutely zero in my childhood you could look at and say that would have set me up for
where we're going to head. Yeah. No, thank you. And I guess to get into something quite real, you finished in 97, and unfortunately 5 of your mates have taken their life since then. You mentioned your childhood and not a beautiful childhood. However, I guess reality comes in and slaps you in the face, and losing 5 mates. Are you happy to share about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, those, it's important that those 5 men's legacy live on.
Yep.
And very much I'll feel for the families and close people that they've left behind, as is mentioned in the book. It's had a huge impact on not only myself, but everyone in our year. I think possibly the age spread was, when we were 19 and young, right through to very recently up to 37, sort of 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, so it's sort of, it definitely is something that I think as we've all emotionally matured as men and adults, now have a far greater appreciation of the sadness of what's occurred in that situation. And I think we're also very aware that because of that, we have to bind together a lot more and look after each other.
And obviously, knowing what you know now and reflecting back on, I guess, from 19 up until today, you could say, Was there any signs that you noticed within your friends, or is there anything that you could sort of point out now where you go, okay, well that doesn't seem right?
Yeah, probably not from an individual specifics case, but I can certainly say that, as we discussed amongst our peer group, friends from school, that our year was exceptional with regards to achievement. So whether it be sport, academic, we were outstanding. And probably didn't think of that much at the time, but as sort of started that emotional maturity, you think about life, and people aren't always, I guess, conditioned to what it's like not to come first or to be the best. And the weight of expectation is really strong in that regard. And I think when I look back now, you know, we were very much of a culture of win, success. It's only wisdom and age where you actually go, well, success is often defined by getting back up. It's not a matter of how many times you get knocked down, and you actually have to get knocked down to move forward, to build resilience and all these sort of things. But I guess as high performance, potentially people with high expectations, dealing with that in later life may have been a challenge for some people, and been a challenge for me as well, certainly.
Yeah, and thank you, that word resilience. The book that we're about to go into definitely finishes with resilience. So I can tell you. Well, thank you for sharing that, mate. Because losing 5 mates in your year, it's a big number. Losing just one's hard, but to lose 5, and I appreciate you sharing. And I guess if you are young and you are listening to this, please like or share. But just take that courage to speak up and reach out, because no matter how big or small you think your contribution is to this earth, it's worth saving. So.
Absolutely.
Mate, onto the book. I love how you've used quotes throughout, so I'm going to refer to quite a few quotes as we go here, mate. So I'll go into our first one. Things are not always what they seem. The first appearance deceives many. The intelligence of a few perceives what has been carefully hidden. Now, could it be safe that, as I mentioned here, could it be safe to say that quote refers to a hidden message of struggle you're going through, and when you started to be affected by your illness?
Yeah. Out of all the quotes in the book, that is probably the one that has multiple angles to it, I suppose. And how you've interpreted it there is, there's definitely an element of, I lived a life. When you track it back now, you can quite clearly see the patterns and things like that. But as you're going through that journey, you've not even convinced yourself, I suppose. So no matter how bright you are, your self-awareness, all these things, you in a lot of ways are living a lie to yourself, not only other people. So very difficult for another person to see what it is that you're hiding from yourself at times. When I was actually in hospital, the psychiatrist I was seeing had an image of a zebra on his wall, and basically it was a previous patient that said, "Thank you, when others have seen a horse, you've stopped to take the time to see a zebra." Now there's a famous quote by an author called Tess Gerritsen. I don't know what book it is in. I tried to use it here, but I couldn't because of copyright and all those sort of things. But it's along the lines of, I guess, when medical students go to medical school, if they hear a hoofbeat, they're trained to think that it's a horse, because 99 out of 100 times it will be a horse. Therefore, if a patient gives a blood sample, they will be automatically biased to think that it presents as a horse. But what happens if on this one occasion it happened to be a zebra? Now that didn't really, I was baffled by it as I sat in the surgery, but then when I got out of hospital and looked back on it and look at my journey, I'm just so grateful that someone took the time to spend, I guess, the time that was needed to track the history and also look at things differently from multiple angles. Because I presented like a horse to many doctors over time. Very easy to, general depression, general anxiety, it's probably what you need to do, and you go away. It wasn't until I was hospitalised and they could actually take the time to ask the right questions that they identified that it was a zebra. Now the difference between general anxiety, depression and obsessive-compulsive disorder, whilst obsessive-compulsive disorder is anxiety at its core, for starters, just one example is you have to be medicated in a very different way. It's a complex quote, but I'm glad you picked up on it.
No, and what I'm hearing here, as you mentioned, someone's taken the time to perhaps look for something different, right? And I think that just underlines the meaning of just take the time to listen, right? And if you're watching this and someone's struggling, just take that time to listen. Mate, tell me about the 26th of February 2019. In your book, you shared journal entries, and as you've started your inner work, which I find really interesting, that with that inner work, you go through stages, and it starts off through your book: denial, sorrow, perspective, reflection, family, oblivious, stigma, and sense. And I see obviously a definite natural progression there. But are you happy to take us through that inner work?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Tuesday, the 26th of February 2019 was the day I was admitted to hospital by my wife, and my little girl also came along. That was overwhelming in many ways to think, oh, this is actually happening, and your 3-year-old daughter is there, and I questioned whether I should have protected her from that. And I thought, well, at some point we have to make this more of a normalised process. I was definitely in denial on that Tuesday. Monday, it just hit me that, well, it was bad. And went to the doctor, and the rest is kind of history. Tuesday, when I fronted the hospital, I kind of probably thought, I'll be back to my old tricks. I will just tell the doctor what they want to hear in the hospital, and then I'll be back to work in 1 or 2 days' time, because my work was everything. Right? That was my identity, was what drove me. I loved it. I loved the people and those sort of things. I really wanted to get back there as quickly as possible, which just shows how oblivious I was to how broken I was. Now, by Tuesday night was my first night in hospital. Wednesday morning I woke up, and there was no more bravado, there was no more denial. I was broken and felt fear before, felt scared before in life, but never like this. I guess it was just that overwhelming fear and dread that everything you knew about your life, your relationships, your career, all these things is potentially now broken, to the point of thought, well, what happens if I'm institutionalised in for the rest of my life? So that was a tough day, the Wednesday. Wednesday night, I remember lying in bed and thinking, what can I do? And I wanted to try to find a relatable story where I could read, and someone who'd been in a similar situation that had managed to get out to the other side. The only thing I could find that was slightly relatable was the book by Osher Günsberg. Now, Osher is obviously a wonderful man, and I did read the book, but it was very hard to relate to that given his celebrity status, and I'm just a standard person. So that's kind of what the book is about too. So if anyone finds themselves in a similar situation, there is something that is written that may be relatable to someone to an extent. But those, 2 weeks in hospital was just a wave of emotion. And any given day, different emotions can come. Some you feel courageous that you've taken a step and you're doing the right thing. Guilt was immense. Two sides of the fence. One side is that I'd let my family down, obviously, to get in this position, and the other is that I'd let my work down. And really, I didn't know how I would escape that feeling of guilt. I didn't think there was too many more outs apart from something that would have been really sad.
I was just going to ask, obviously you checked in on the 26th, and thank God that you took that action. But I guess just going back, what was it that you knew that you needed to get help? Like what? Because that's where the courage, like all of it's courageous, I must say. But if you could take that, and this is a question without notice, could we go back to where you're like, I need help? What was going on for you?
The Monday I scrambled to try and get in to see a psychologist. Couldn't find my usual doctors because you just can't get in all the time, they're busy. Rang my wife. She just knew it was not the standard version of me. I've had battles before, I've struggled before, but never saying the things I was saying. She left work. She was blessed she worked for a place that would let her do that, come home and support me. She said, I'm taking you to the GP. And in hindsight, that GP had probably for about a year now been trying to say, you need to, up your medication, you need to start taking responsibility for things. And I just say, yeah, no worries, and just deliver the stock standard message, tick a box, move on, get on with life. On this particular day, I think with the GP and my wife there, I couldn't continue the same behaviour. It was basically the question from the GP that said, so if you didn't come here today, what would have you done? And that was when I probably communicated something of it wasn't going to end well.
Yes.
It's the first time I'd said that, and from then it was just like, well, you know, you're now probably at risk to yourself to an extent. Whether that was ideation or reality, you know, it's hard to comment, but that was how I certainly was. So it was medical intervention.
Yep.
I don't think I ever would have gone to hospital by myself.
Yep.
But at that point, it was kind of like, well, you've got to do this for your family, like, because if you don't, it's a pretty terrible outcome. Now I can articulate that well in hindsight, but at the time, I was just. If you had said to me, would you like a tea or a coffee, I probably couldn't have answered you.
Yeah, wow.
My brain was broken.
Yeah. Mate, and thank you for sharing that. Look, reading through the book, you open about the deep work that you needed to undertake, which we're sort of going into now. Initially, you had the assumption that not telling anyone about your situation was the best solution.
Yep.
However, you realised that element needed to change to be able to move forward, which I think is fantastic. Could you go into detail about how difficult it would have been to initially discuss that hospitalisation with your family or your friends?
Yeah, absolutely. So my brother, who I'm close to, never knew I was hospitalised. None of my best friends did. My parents did, my parents-in-law did, my wife did, and the person I was closest to at work did, who was a friend and still is a friend. But outside of that, I really didn't want anyone to know because I was still very fearful of processing the stigma.
Yes.
I didn't know how this ended for myself in relation to, do I ever work again? I really had no clear, visible future path. Where now, if you say to me, talk about that hospitalisation, it's like a conversation of what I had for lunch. But back then, I remember ringing my closest friend, probably after I'd been out for a week, and telling him what had happened. And they were really hard conversations because the universal feedback on the other side was, how come you're just telling me about this now? I wanted to help you. And those people started to feel guilty. And that was hard also to process because probably, that's when I started to realise the empathetic side of what it's like on the other side of the fence. To go through a process with someone who is mentally ill or goes through that really dark period of time, that these people were just so empathetic to me and just genuinely upset that they couldn't be there to help. Now, if I look back on it, could have I done anything different in that regard? I actually probably wouldn't have, because I sort of think if people had got in my ear, right, or I'd let them tell me what I wanted to hear, which is basically don't go to hospital, like man up, you'll be fine,
suck it up,
that sort of stuff. But I've tried to do a lot of work since then, I guess, in letting people know that you could not have seen this coming. I didn't see it coming. It was not planned. And in reality, I think in my life, at some point it was always going to happen. I was just going to push and push and push until it just, there was no nowhere to go. And I needed to, quotes everywhere, but you really need to see the bottom of the bottom before you can come back.
Absolutely. Do you find that sharing your story helps people to be vulnerable enough to actually share how they're feeling? Have you had that experience?
Massively. And that's where I make the point and say that this is not a special story. At this given time, it's an important story. But I'd like to think that in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, all the magnificent work that you're doing with maths and on bits and pieces of fronts, that these conversations, we don't have to sit here and have this conversation like it's special, because it's just happening. Right? Like a person who diagnosed with diabetes, that is the journey that they're on. But people have shared with me things like when they've I haven't mentioned the hospital in the book, but obviously there's a passage about a really steep hill, and so many people have just been able to say, oh yeah, I remember that hill when I was at that hospital, and my partner was at that hospital. So it's prevalent to the point where, you know, you could go to anyone and say, hey, have you ever had a broken bone yourself, or helped someone who's had a broken bone? Now I'd imagine 100% of people would say yes. If you reframe that and said, have you ever, you know, had to have some time off or whatever it is, or take it easy because you've broken your brain, right, or your mind, or had to help someone who's done the same, I think you'd find it's 100% of people.
Mate, I have to totally agree. Yeah, when you said that, if someone was like, oh, you know, I've broken my brain to take time, you'd be like, well, I haven't heard that one before.
Yeah.
But, you know, it is so true. But I do love this chapter. It's called Piecing a Broken Puzzle Back Together.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that title, as I feel it gives a good description of your journey moving forward. Like, you know, you're a puzzle together, it's broken, now we're bringing it back. And as Buddha once said, this is my quotes here, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. Do you mind taking us through your puzzle and bringing it back together?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess all of us have a puzzle that gets put together, similar to we have a story. Now, when that puzzle is together, we probably fight really hard to keep it together.
Yeah.
Now, there are probably parts of that puzzle that are not necessarily great to remain in there, but it forms part of a story, or what we perceive to be ourselves, our ego, so to speak. Now, we probably fight so hard to keep that together and don't let pieces of it go where we should, whether they be, you know, beliefs that probably don't serve us well anymore in life, etc. In fighting so hard to keep it, we blow it up.
Yeah.
Right. And then I guess you can look at that and say, well, that's the worst thing that's ever happened to me, because all my identity, basically, it's just a massive hit to your ego, the person that you thought you were, the person you present yourself, the person you're seen as. Or you can reframe that and say, well, you know, it's that breakdown, breakthrough thing. It's the classic stoicism, the obstacle is the way. The thing that you think is the hardest thing, or you're most afraid of protecting, you know, that identity of yourself. Well, take that away, right? And you'll find you're capable of so much more. It's not that puzzle that exists now that is you, it's where that puzzle is going next. Now, when you've broken it, it's a magnificent opportunity to start again, right? And as you say, it's like everything in life. You know, if you, obviously, you're a fit guy, so you must exercise a lot. You know that to get to where you want to get to with exercise, you have to take little steps.
Yes.
Now, when a puzzle is together, we kind of forget this, and we operate in this speed, intensity of busyness or hurriedness or whatever it is, that you forget that everything needs to build by slowness, and it takes time, patience, all these things. And when you've broken your puzzle, it is such a great opportunity to look at it and say, okay, yeah, I've learned from that, let's not go there again. But now's my opportunity to put a better puzzle together and leave some of the bits off that didn't serve me well last time.
You're just bringing back to that introduction of your breakdown can be your breakthrough. You know, and as you said, your puzzle's broken, but you now have an opportunity to create a new one.
Yeah.
You know, and it's, you know, how do you fill that space, all those pieces together?
Yep.
How do you bring them together?
Yeah.
It actually segues into the next question, which we're becoming old dogs now, mate. So
we're holding up better than
Well, as you can see the back. The title is, or the chapter title, I should say, An Older Dog Learns New Tricks. Please take us through that stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess it's only in hindsight that I've sort of looked at why we're called a human being and not a human doing. I was a perfect example at that point of breaking of a human doing, just so driven by what's next, with zero gratitude for the great things that were going on now. So by an old dog learning new tricks, I had to relearn that the most valuable things and important things in life are simple.
Yeah.
And it can be, as I identify in the book, like, I used to be a nightmare, like, to go shopping with. I would never write a list, I would never take a time, I would just walk in and just grab as many things as I could, chuck them in a trolley, walk out, probably not even with processing whether I needed those things or the family needed them. My mindset was that an activity like grocery shopping is stopping me from the end game, which
Yep.
is getting on to the next
Yep.
great thing, whatever that was at the time. I had to slow down and say, well, where I was at that point then, the most valuable thing I could do for my family was to take time to write a shopping list, work out what it is that needed to be cooked in the household, and take the time to enjoy it, to the point where it became for me, I went from once upon a time as just something that was just another thing in life I had to deal with, to something that became quite a positive experience, because it was where I would practice my mindfulness in those early stages. So I would walk down every aisle slowly, breathe, keep my chest straight, and just take my time. And then it was at the time when, I don't know, Lion King Ushies or something was happening, so it was also a nice experience, because when I finished I would get those and I'd take them to my little girl as well at the end of the day. And I could see it in other people's reactions to me. Like, usually someone who's on the checkout, if I'm coming through at the end of my shop, I would probably just grunt, right? Not nice, I know, but whereas now I was having full conversations with people because I had bandwidth as well, and was really starting to enjoy the simple things in life. Success is defined differently for different people. I think the society we live in, it's reinforced very heavily that success looks a certain way, more than ever, instant gratification, all those things. But the things that are really important and really matter, they take time, and you need to give them the time. Just get up, go for a walk outside, breathe. I've lost all of that.
Yep.
So that was where the old dog, they sound like they're pretty basic tricks, but they weren't for me at that given time. It was a starting gate.
And mate, well done. And I'm hearing just slow down, and you mentioned gratitude.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned, that taking that time to create a list, to then create a meal for your family, taking that time and being grateful, being able to do that. It's that's awesome.
In so many other parts of this world, you don't get that.
Yes.
And we forget how blessed and lucky we really are.
Especially here in Australia. And that sort of brings us coming towards the end of the book, which brings us to 2020. You write an amazing passage, and I quote, "Probably like most people, I did not see the coronavirus coming, nor did it matter anyway, as I'm continually learning from Stoicism. The next battlefront will always be on the horizon." And what I took away from this is, no matter what front is no matter what's in front of us, challenge, no matter how big or small, will always appear, and it's how we choose to take on those battles. Yeah. Could you walk us through that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess one of the biggest fallacies of life is that life can always be good and deliver us exactly what we want. The duality of life is that you're born and you pass away at some point. So there's always an element of experience in there. It's a very simple concept, the circle of control versus the circle of what you can't control. If I look back, before the breakthrough experience, what I was trying to control in my own mind was ridiculous. Whether it be, from a financial perspective, or looking at different markets or opportunities and trying to forward forecast things, and it's actually a big fallacy, because we're not in control of those things in a lot of regards. And I've since come to appreciate that uncertainty is one of the worst things for mental health, mental illness. But there are so many things that we can control and have certainty about, and often they can be the simplest things, because we're blessed, where we can just walk outside and go for a walk. Now, coronavirus has taken that away from some people, particularly, Victoria's been through a really tough period recently. But I really did have to step back and go, all the anxiety, all the worry You know, some of that is intuitive, it's patterned, it's been there for so long, it's never going to go. You know, it's a chemical imbalance in the brain, obsessive-compulsive disorder. I won't always be able to control that, but there are certainly things that I can control, and one of those is just the simple exercise. Well, you know, with the coronavirus, no one really saw that coming. It's the universe's way of saying, well, things seem to be out of balance at the moment, and we will always have those things. I think as humans, we probably sometimes think that we're actually in control, and the world just likes to, the universe likes to remind us that no, you're just another participant in the system of nature, and it will do what it has to do. The coronavirus, I think its timing, for me, like, it's obviously tested everyone, right? And some people will also look at that and go, well, was that the worst thing that's happened to me in 2020, or am I going to let that become one of the best things that's happened to me? It's forced me to slow down, spend more time with family. I was probably blessed in the sense that I was prepared for it in a lot of regards. But even then, it's still about saying, well, what is it I can control in that situation? I can't control where the next outbreak will be. But it's just focusing on those things. And it's a classic Stoic way of thinking. Very balanced people in life would just say, well, isn't that certainly very obvious? But we forget it at times.
And when we talked about resilience, and it sounds like that journey that you did the year before COVID hit, it built up your resilience, right? Because it was another challenge coming at you, but it's like, well, how do I deal with it?
Yeah, resilience it's one of those buzzwords at the moment, definitely.
Yes.
And my perception of it has certainly changed. I think to build resilience, you actually have to, I don't like the word failure, but if failures never exist, right?
That's right.
I'm not sure if
just lessons.
You have to go through lessons to build resilience. Yes. You can't sit at the top of the tree all the time. Once upon a time, I thought those that sat at the top of the tree were just more resilient, but the reality is, it's probably just they've fallen more times. But you don't see that fall.
Yes.
I think that's important to talk about those falls more, so that the next generation grows up and looks at it and goes, you know, you've got to have a crack at new things. You've got to have a growth mindset. I was never taught all of this growing up, and they need to know that it's okay not to finish number one and then to be able to come back from whatever it is that you deal with.
Well, the beauty is having a go.
Absolutely.
Right, it's having a go, even if it's just for your mental health or your physical health or your relationship, or something that you want to learn. It's just having a go at it.
Yeah, the universe transpires to reward action.
Yeah.
And once again, I've had to learn that the hard way. I can't think about every outcome or every situation. Sometimes you just have to do something, and then you will learn from what the universe does after you put that foot forward. But it's that step out the other side, the quote you mentioned earlier from Buddha, like taking the small step first. If you never take that, the greatness that may come from that will never happen.
Mate, we're now 2020, November 2020. And to me, it seems that obviously the lessons you've gone over the last, you could say, nearly 2 years have created the person that you are today. What's the next 12 months got in store for you? Like, how does that look for you in terms of your, I guess, personal health, work? What are you going to focus on?
Well, I'd probably be a bit of a fraud if I sat here now and said I knew exactly what was going to happen in the next 12 months.
That's true, yeah.
Whatever transpires and gets delivered, I want to meet it with an untroubled mind.
Yep.
I want to meet it as a balanced human, which is always an ongoing battle because, as we all know from mental health and mental illness, it's not like you recover and then you say, well, you're okay now, go and be. You've got to remain focused. I call it 1%ers. From a holistic perspective, I have to get all those 1%ers right. Do I get them right all the time? No. So next year, if there's one area I'd like to work on more, it will certainly be to align my physical fitness with my mind. and my idea of fitness is obviously very different to what another person's is.
Yes.
It's all relative, but simply just moving the body more. My little girl starts school next year, so I want to be extremely present for her. The end of this year has been interesting because there's been a few people approach me with new business opportunities,
Yep.
I suppose. And once upon a time, I would have just been, when do we start?
Yep.
Let's get into it. It's been really good because those people have actually said, look, I want to have a chat to you about this, but let's just have the honest conversation first. I've read your book,
Yep.
right? And do you really, what I'm going to present to you is because I think it was a great opportunity for both of us, but I want you to think really hard if you want to be taking this on. And that has just been gold, because I haven't taken them on. And these people have been, you made a good decision there. I can see that you're starting to grow a little bit as opposed to just chasing the next shiny object. So I don't think I'll write another book.
I'm going to say the old dog gets wiser.
Still, we never get there, do we? There's always plenty to learn.
We're always learning.
But I'm excited about next year, absolutely. It's been a tough year for so many people. I'm blessed it wasn't as tough for me, but mindful of what others have had to go through.
Mate, where do people find the book? Where do people find more about you?
Probably the easiest way is just to think about Marcus Aurelius, who was the Stoic philosopher. I work for myself now. The business is called Aurelius, so there's obviously that strong personal tie. And then the book's on there, and obviously love for people to get in contact with yourself if they would like a copy as well. As I said, many people have paid it forward, so we have some copies to give to people if they think it would help them. Yeah,
we'll put a link in the notes next to this film. So, mate, if you could get a message to thousands of people out there, what would your message be?
Talk.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very big step. It's a vulnerable risk to share with someone. I think once upon a time in this space, that vulnerable risk was probably a step too far for many people. I would say now that you'd be absolutely amazed at what gets delivered on the other side of the fence. I also think people, when they get to that point of they only think that there is one outcome and that's a finite outcome, and that them not being of any value to anyone else. If you can never have that conversation, you'll never actually know how much value you really are to people. SPP, I think, Suicide Prevention Pathways, has a statistic that for every person that sadly takes their life, there's 150 people impacted. So that's 150 people that would care, love, and give anything for you to stay here. If you never verbalise that, you never get to know that. So talk and stay in, hang in as long, because things do get better.
I've been sharing a comment of late that, I've been fortunate enough to go down and do a lot of personal development courses and read a few books, and one of the common themes that I'm hearing out about it is be vulnerable enough to share.
Yeah.
So even if it's from a business sense, or what we're talking more as being a personal sense, is just share what's going on, and it comes back to your message of talk.
Yeah. It takes a village to raise a child, and sometimes it takes a village to save an adult's life. And you've got to talk.
100%. Peter, mate, I just want to say thank you for your amazing story, and I really enjoyed the honesty and the transparency, and from one human being to another. Thank you for having the courage to write. And as you mentioned, or we've mentioned, like it is a normal. It's it's nothing unique. However, what is unique is that you've put it into a book that I feel that a lot of people will connect with and find it. It's an easy read. It's not a big read, but the impact is huge, mate. And from one human, thank you for doing it, because the more people that share their story and show that it is normal and that it is okay to get help, we're going to help save lives. So
thank you for having me.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it.
If you've really enjoyed this, hit the like button, please share. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you're this deep into the interview, You've gotten 40 minutes into it, so thank you very much. You can check us out at mentalawarenessfoundation.org or walkforawareness.com.au. Otherwise, we'll see you next time, and thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Wes. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.